get the pleasure of introducing our first speaker of the conference, Steve Grove. So Steve is the CEO and publisher of the Minnesota Star Tribune, where he leads the company's operations and directs its strategy. Before becoming CEO in 2023, Grove served as Governor Tim Walz's Commissioner of Employment and Economic Development, where he led the administration's efforts to grow and protect the Minnesota economy during a dynamic and challenging 4 years in our state history. He is a Minnesota native and a graduate of Northfield High School, and he earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy and economics from Claremont McKenna College and a master's degree in public policy analysis from Harvard. Steve and his wife Mary are the co-founders of Silicon North Stars, a nonprofit that helps underserved youth find career pathways in technology. They moved to Minneapolis from Silicon Valley in 2018 and are proud parents of 7-year-old twins, a yellow lab, and 2 farm cats. So please welcome me in joining Steve Grove to the stage.
Well, thanks, AJ, and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thanks so much for having me. We're only 15 minutes into this day, and I'm already the third Steve that you've heard from on stage, so I'm honored. And it's just really nice to be here. It's an honor to be in St. Cloud. I love this community. I've been here a lot since Mary and I moved back to Minnesota about 8 years ago. And as Deed Commissioner and here at the Strib, I've just always enjoyed getting to know St. Cloud. We did a stop here on our Minnesota Matters tour last year, sort of a statewide tour, trying to understand how the Strib might expand across Minnesota. And had a great conversation with leaders here. We're going to do another stop in about a week and a half here in St. Cloud again with the Strib and bring our reporters and others here to learn from all of you. I got a chance this morning to meet your mayor for the first time, your new mayor, lovely mayor, Mayor Anderson. Enjoyed getting to know him for the first time. And I see so many familiar faces here in the audience, and I wanted to start by thanking you all for what you do. This is a room full of do-gooders. Let's just say it out loud. Every one of you are doing incredibly important and diverse things to lift up your communities and the state. And just to echo what Steve said a moment ago, at a time when there's so much challenge in our community, so much seeming division in our country, I think this room is a reason for optimism. I mean, I think you see places every day where there's not division, actually, where there's a lot of togetherness, and politics aside, people are coming together to do big things. And the work and the funding and the programs that you have in this community and the organizations you lead are a huge part of why I think we should be proud to live in Minnesota and proud to live in these communities. So let's start with a round of applause for the collective good work of people trying to make this a better community and a state. And thanks for letting me be a part of it. I'll give a little bit of my background, then I have some slides to walk you through the Star Tribune, where we're at in this unique moment in our history. But just a bit more on me, since you've given me a chance to share some thoughts. I grew up in Northfield, as AJ said. Left after high school and spent most of my time since then outside of the state. So I went to college in Claremont McKenna College, as AJ said, out in California. Spent a year in Japan teaching English. Then spent some time volunteering in India. And then did what every 25-year-old should do at some point, which is I moved back in with my parents and tried to figure out what's next. And when I was doing that, started working for my dad. He had a small landscaping business in town, but also started writing for my local paper, the Northfield News. And this was sort of before the internet was that much of a thing, and so print really reigned supreme. The Northfield News had a large collection of reporters that worked there, and I was just kind of stringing for them. I wasn't on staff, but I got to write articles about my hometown, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that opportunity just to understand this place that I'd grown up in, but through the lens of journalism and storytelling, and ended up getting an internship at a magazine out in Boston, so left Northfield and spent some time with the Atlantic Monthly as an unpaid editorial intern for a few months, and then started writing for the Boston Globe, and kind of was beginning this career in journalism, but thought, the internet seems like it's changing, media quite a bit, so maybe I'll do something slightly different. And ended up going to the Kennedy School to study public policy, and while I was there, discovered YouTube, which at this time was a brand new site, mainly being used to kind of share cat videos and, kind of fun, goofy stuff. but it was starting to be used in politics in really unique ways too. And there was a senator in Virginia named George Allen who was an incumbent, and this was in 2006, so kind of before social media was really a thing, quite frankly, who was caught on camera in a rural Virginia campaign stop using a racial slur, and that video went viral on YouTube. He thought he was just speaking to these 23 or so people at the stop, but in fact, with YouTube, he was speaking to the world. And that video went viral. It changed the tenor of that campaign. He ended up losing by, I think, 0.5 percentage point to his challenger, and sort of this era of YouTube politics was born. Suddenly, anything that you said anywhere could now be captured and shared, and this sort of new level of accountability, this new kind of meritocratic environment for media. Everybody had a satellite TV in their back pocket, and it was all upside. We couldn't imagine what could ever go wrong with that. It just seemed amazing. It was going to change power structures in our communities and in our country for good. And so I came on board coming out of grad school to YouTube to help that platform shape how it was going to figure out this news and political space, again, in kind of a technology that was built for entertainment and for fun. And spent 6 years at YouTube building out our news and politics team there. These were the early days, but given the viral nature of YouTube, we were able to do some things that were kind of unique at the time. We did a presidential debate partnership with CNN where we had YouTube videos being asked during a debate. This is now somewhat more commonplace, but back then it was really strange. I remember we had to really work hard on Mitt Romney in particular, who didn't want to come because in the previous debate he'd seen with Democratic candidates, we'd had a snowman ask a question about climate change, which he thought was below the office of a presidential candidate. Maybe he's right, I don't know. But anyway, we're trying stuff. We're trying new things. And I enjoyed that time at YouTube. It was really wonderful. And ended up at Google after that. Spent a few years at the most powerful social network of all time, Google+. I'm sure you use it every day. It's probably on your phone right now. You're probably checking it while I'm... Actually, it was a major failure, a huge flop. But I learned a lot from that. I ran a partnerships team, and Google was trying to get into the social space and beat Facebook, and we pretty colossally failed. But you learn a lot, oftentimes more so when you try something that doesn't work than when you try something that does. And enjoyed that, and then ended my career at Google building a team called the Google News Lab. And this was in some ways getting back to the media roots, but felt that Google had done a lot, frankly, to sort of decimate the local advertising space for local news organizations and news organizations in general, because internet is just a far more effective and targeted way to reach people with ads than newspapers. And at the same time, Google depends on an ecosystem of information to get good content out there and for the search engine to actually have a quality set of results to bring back to you. And so we built a team at Google focused on really connecting the company with newsrooms around the world to help train journalists on both data and on technology and tools, but also try to reimagine the model a little bit. So I enjoyed my time there, but as was said earlier, Mary and I, my wife, I met at Google, had kids. We had twins 8 years ago, and biggest blessing of our life, and really enjoyed it. But that's the moment where any Minnesotan wonders, should I go back to Minnesota at this point? Because, man, is this a great place to raise a family. And so Mary and I talked a lot about that and decided to kind of reinvent our lives together and moved here. She left Google immediately and joined a venture capital firm focused on investing in startups outside of the coasts. As many in this room, I see Ryan and Nick and others who've done that themselves, know this is an underviewed market in a lot of ways. There's a lot of talent here that coastal firms just don't see. So she started a firm doing that, and then I left Google to join state government and really enjoyed it. It was the honor of a life to get to work during the pandemic under Governor Walz and a whole host of really great leaders at a time that ended up being quite different than what I imagined I would encounter. I went in thinking it's going to be all about creating jobs, and then the pandemic hit, and in like a day, we lost about 450,000 jobs in the state overnight based on sort of having to close down the economy. So just a dynamic time. You all remember it well. I won't make us all relive it up here, but it was a really unique window of time. And if you're ever going to do public service, you might as well do it in a window of time when things are challenging. You get to make a bigger impact, and I just really enjoyed it. It was an honor, and worked with many business leaders in this room and throughout this community to figure out exactly how you navigate that moment. And we did our best. It was a great journey. I was sort of ready for a second term with the governor. I enjoyed the job. DEED is a fascinating agency. I enjoyed the work. I met so many people here and across the state that were doing inspiring things. And of course, DEED's all about growth, which was fun, so especially after the pandemic had subsided. But I got an email from a recruiter and heard that the Strib was going through some changes, and really Glenn Taylor, who owns the Strib and is one of the, I think, greatest Minnesotans to ever live. He has really saved so many institutions in the state, really wanted the Strib to be on solid footing moving forward. And he knew that it was a newspaper that had been successful. It's a 158-year-old institution. He bought it in 2014 just as it was coming out of bankruptcy and really helped kind of save and solidify it, but knew that we had to make some pretty significant changes if the Strib was going to remain the largest newsroom in the Midwest, which it is, and remain influential and powerful as a source of objectivity and truth and great journalism for our region, because digital was moving a lot faster than it ever had before. And so I had never thought of being a newspaper publisher. I still kind of am like, oh my gosh, I'm a newspaper publisher. It's a job I hadn't ever had on my radar. And again, I was enjoying my time in government, but this seemed like a unique opportunity. Again, really thanks to Glenn and his willingness to reinvest in it, but also a pretty good legacy of a newspaper that's made a lot of impact in our state. So that today I could talk a little bit about that journey that we've been on, give some context to that. I won't try to go too long because I'd love to hear what questions you have, but I do have some slides that kind of set the stage. I know you'll hear from Mukhtar and Lisa and Reed Anfinson later today on diving deeper into some of these issues. There's a lot of great media leaders I've come to learn in our ecosystem who are doing some pretty powerful things. So the Strib story in a nutshell, and we'll see if this works. It does. Starts out with kind of the bad news, but don't worry, we'll get to the good news. The bad news is, you know it well in this community, local news faces unprecedented challenges. There's just no other way to put it. Things are a little bit different here in Minnesota, but not that different. We face the same headwinds that I think most publications and markets face in the world today. If you're watching any of the headlines on how journalism is evolving, you can see that almost everywhere, news organizations are laying off massive number of reporters, trying to restructure. I mentioned the ad model today that has been kind of riding in the face of many news organizations, but so is just the attention ecosystem, right? The time people have to pay attention to news, the amount of free news resources out there that compete with something that costs money, like a subscription. And when you look at that, in Minnesota, we are in no way in some sort of special place. We've seen not just 8, this is only one headline as an example, but we've seen dozens of local community newspapers go away. And you look at the St. Cloud Times here in St. Cloud, and it was 50 journalists, I think, 20 years ago, and now down to a couple. They do great work, have done great work, but boy, is that a drop-off, right? And a community loses a lot when it doesn't have that common fact base of what's taking place. That's not something any of you don't know. This is a decade in Minnesota. I think these stats are kind of stunning. I still kind of can't believe them when I read them out loud. In the last decade, we've lost 34% of our newspapers in the state. But I think even more so, we've lost 64% of the newspaper journalists in Minnesota in the past decade. Those stats roughly, match the national trends, and that has a real cost. You look at our revenue streams, and not to get into the business plan or the weeds, but just to give you a sense for the existential challenge this presents to organizations like ours, we've seen a drop in print revenue of 30% just in the last 7 years. And our ad revenue in these legacy revenue streams has gone down by 60%. So we don't have the luxury of sort of just waiting around to sort of see what the internet will do to us. We have to have a much more proactive orientation, and every news organization does. I think, I don't probably need to remind anybody here why it matters, but it bears just saying for a second the role that news organizations play in a community. Having a common fact base has huge effects on the civic fiber and civic togetherness of a region. And you look at the studies that are out there, if you have local news, you feel more tied to your community. If you have local news, you're more likely to give to charity. You're more likely to engage in your community foundation and help support nonprofits. If you have more local news, you're more likely to vote because you know what's happening and you're aware of what's happening in your community. And, shocker, if you have great objective journalism in a community, you see less polarization. And so I'm pretty worried, as I hope you all are too, that as local news, more so than any other sector of our news ecosystem, continues to decline, that is fraying at the very fabric of what holds our communities together. And it is not as if somehow we woke up one day and everybody said, you know what, it doesn't really matter what the facts are anymore. We don't really want to know the truth. Every single person in this room wants to know the truth. Everybody in this community wants to know the truth. And journalism is the best shot we have at understanding at any given moment. But the market dynamics at play and the polarization and societal shifts we have in what we trust and what we don't are pretty pervasive. And it's not just media. I think you know this well. America, unique amongst developing nations, has seen massive declines in the trust in basic institutions in our society. It's media, it's law enforcement, it's academia, it is government, it is organized religion. We face, I think, this sort of institutional crisis in our market today. And media, I think, risks being glommed in with the rest of it in ways that aren't helpful to our industry, and particularly local news, which if you bucket it in with sort of national, more polarized cable news channels, for example, can kind of get caught in this fray of are you left or are you right? But at the end of the day, local news is local news. It's what's happening in your community. And I think that this theme you'll hear, I hope, in more conversations later today, is just so central to helping people understand their civic responsibility, but also just understand what ties them to each other outside of whatever political identity they have. So given all those contexts, and again, that's the bad news, we'll have a lot of good news to share, but that's kind of the context that any of us are operating in a media environment. We've been on this journey for the last 2 years. In fact, I just hit my 2-year anniversary at the Strib last week, so I'm just about 2 years into this. It's flown by. But have been, thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's an honor. And it's flown by, I think, because we've been on a pretty unique path. Again, Glenn's given us this lane to try some new things that most local news organizations don't get. We've gathered the company together. We've reinvented a whole host of things. I'm going to walk you through what those things have been today. But it's rare in life that you get a chance to take the shot we're taking. And I'll just say that out loud. We feel lucky to get to do it. And it's, I think, existentially important to whether or not the Strib can survive and remain as the largest newsroom in the Midwest. So here's sort of our new effort at the Strib, this chance we've had to reimagine ourselves in a nutshell. And I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts about it. At a basic level, we've had to kind of rebrand and refocus our effort. We now are sort of positioning the Strib in the same way we kind of think Minnesota is positioned in our country, which is we're the heart and the voice of the North. That you'll see through in all of our materials, all of our brand. We've completely retooled our newspaper, but more importantly, our digital assets too. So as you see, we kind of, I'll go back to this for a second. We've renamed ourselves. I'll talk about that in a minute. But every single pixel on every single platform is different than it was 2 years ago. So we completely redid our website, completely redid our app that you use every day. We've redone the kind of under the hood stuff, so how the site works and the CMS, and all of our social platforms. So it's just been kind of a reboot of the basic digital infrastructure. Believe me, we still have a ways to go, but we've made a significant amount of progress on the digital front that we're excited about, all under this idea of a new brand. Again, the heart and voice of the North is that kind of rallying cry. But the kind of name is the biggest thing, right? And this is a little bit of an evolution of all the names that our institution has had over time. So it's not as if we've been, the New York Times forever, like they can claim. We've had some evolutions over time. One of them is really weird. If you see it pop up, it's just like and then it's like a picture. That one right there. Like a picture of Minneapolis, I guess. They kind of used that for a while in their masthead. Anyway, different time, different creative thinkers. But we felt like uniquely right now, we could earn our way into being called the Minnesota Star Tribune. And I say earn your way into because you don't just get to slap that up and call it a day. You got to earn the fact that you've called yourself Minnesota. But that's been, I think, a powerful move for us. So we spent about 1.5 years hiring more reporters outside of the Twin Cities, expanding our kind of coverage roadmap and how we focus on communities outside of our metro area, because for some time we've been seen as this metro paper. All the way towards a state fair moment last August of rebooting ourselves as the Minnesota Star Tribune. A lot more to go, but that first step, I think, was a way of saying to our state and our audience, hey, we're here, and we're trying something new. We're trying to stick our head up a little bit. I think a lot of times, when you're a 157-year-old institution like ours, you kind of risk saying, well, everybody knows the Star Tribune, everybody, talks about it. We don't want to make any assumptions that anybody knows about the Star Tribune. You have to stick your head up and make some noise in this environment, especially given how crowded the competitive landscape is. I mean, just to give you a sense, we're not only competing like we used to sort of with the Pioneer Press. In fact, that's sort of a more historical competitive framework. We're competing with Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, Beer of the Month, Sky Zone Trampoline Park. Basically anything that you can subscribe to, is a cost decision that you're making. And the subscription economy has blown up. And not only that, of course, we're also competing with, slightly less better, I'd say probably a lot less better, but I want to be a little careful here, free news outlets that don't cost you anything, right? And so how do you say in the market, hey, we're here, we matter, we have a brand that we hope you trust, It's one that we think can provide a sense of connection and community and sort of validity to what's happening, but we're also not going to sit around and sort of wait for you to come to us. We're going to come to you. And that kind of marketing effort has been a big part of our work over the last year and a half. It's not a solution to our problem, but it's a piece of the strategy, right, to lift up the brand. So this is our entire company on the day that we relaunched, August 18th. That's our headquarters in downtown Minneapolis. Come by if you're ever there. We'd love to show you around. It's a fun spot. A new logo there you can see with a 4-pointed star. We're trying to have some fun, too. We have a mascot, Stribby the Gray Duck. Minnesotans will know the Gray Duck reference there. We started with the loon, and then we're like, well, there's already the loons, but wouldn't Gray Duck be kind of cooler? It's literally a mascot suit that blows up, so you put like a belt on, and there's like a battery, and then you click it on, and it sucks the air, and then it goes up. We had him at an internal town hall a month ago, and the battery went out halfway through his appearance, and so he started to like shrink, and people were like, oh, Stribby! And we had to run him out of that thing and recharge the battery. Anyway. He's a physical mascot, but we try to bring him into the report too. I mean, we're trying to have some fun. Again, we're like a 158-year-old newspaper. We have to kind of be more relevant and try some quirky things, stick our head up a little bit. When you're revitalizing a brand, it can't just be a new logo. It's got to be a little bit more of an identity. So Stribby's been kind of a fun way to do that, and we continue to find ways to put him forward. But look, ultimately, the brand and the name, those things are important, but they're really just a shell within which we do the work that matters to our audience, right? And that's our report. And so here, I think, the biggest thing we've done is lean into Greater Minnesota. I'm curious, I don't think Jenny's here today, but how many of you have met Jenny Berg from the Minnesota Star Tribune? Show your hands. St. Clouders may. No, it's good to see a few hands in the room. Great reporter for us, based here in St. Cloud. We're going to look to expand in St. Cloud more very soon as well. But she's a phenomenal journalist. And she has many other colleagues that have now started in other communities. So we have some folks in Moorhead, the Brainerd Lakes region, Mankato, Rochester. We've doubled down in Duluth, and we're looking to grow more as well. I think being in Greater Minnesota for us is really important. It used to be that the Strib would sort of swoop in, write a story, and swoop back out. And you might as well be the New York Times at that point, right? People in St. Paul remember well the New York Times story from 5 or 6 years ago, written about this community that was, I think, in many ways just ham-fisted, but was kind of a swoop in and swoop out kind of moment. We've had our own versions of that too. I mean, when I did my first listening tour at the Strib, we came by the Leech Lake Reservation in my first 3 or 4 months and sat down with some tribal leaders there. And they were really kind to have us. They had a nice spread and a lunch, and they sat us down, and we were saying, hey, we're just here to listen. Like, what do you think of the Star Tribune? And they're like, well, about 20 years ago, you wrote a story about a murder on our reservation, and we have never forgiven you for it. And no one here reads the Strib, and no one here cares what you have to say. And they were kind, but they're just like, we're going to tell you what's going on. And I was like, oh my gosh, 20 years ago. Well, I went back and read the story later on, of course. It was like a 10,000-word investigative story, so I can see why it had impact. It wasn't just like, oh, a person murdered on our reservation. And I'm sure it was beautifully investigated, and I'm sure it was factual. The reporter, I'm sure, was quality. But that's literally the only thing we had written about Leech Lake, for that entire period of time. And so if that's the impression you've given the state of a community because of the one story you chose to write and went that deep on, then you got to kind of question, what value are we adding to being in this community at all? So I think having your reporters actually live in the market they're writing about is not rocket science, but it does lead to, I think, a better connection and a better sense of, hey, we know the people we're talking about, and we care about the place because it's our place too. And so that's been an important move for us. The other component of being in Greater Minnesota is that we aren't here just to say, oh, the Strib can kind of do what the St. Cloud Times once did, or we're here to sort of take market share from a local paper. In fact, the exact opposite. We have partnered with over a dozen hyperlocal papers in Minnesota to do subscription bundling, so that if you subscribe to a local news organization in that market, for a slight uptick, you can get a digital subscription to the Strib, trying to generate this model of like, how does the larger legacy sort of statewide news organization help spark subscriptions to other papers. And frankly, for us, a digital sub has no real marginal cost. We have to price it, but it gives us an excuse to price ourselves a little lower for a local audience in ways that we hope kind of grows our influence and expands our footprint. So we'll see. It's an experiment. It can be hard to land these sorts of partnerships, but we really want to do this right by the communities that we're in. And so that Minnesota expansion has been big. The other one is just we've chosen new content spaces to focus on. We looked at the data, we looked at the state. Our editors have made some good calls here. And we want to focus on things that are intensely local. And some of these are not rocket science, news and politics, sports, food and culture. But in Minnesota, I think uniquely, the outdoors and business are two where I think this state has always kind of punched above its weight. I don't have to tell you that. Well, the business community here and the outdoors community are strong. So those are two other areas. But, to reorganize a newsroom around these 5 areas was a significant kind of shuffling. And we're still on our way, but, a big step forward for us. Trying to make it worth it to subscribe to the Strib if you just really like sports or if you just really like the outdoors. Because if you just try to package the bundle, it's harder. It's harder to sell the whole bundle these days. It just is. But we still need to kind of get the price of a bundle worked in. So each of these things has to kind of stand on its own in some ways, and that's important. We've also really leaned into voice. And, there was a long time, I think, where you saw places like the Minnesota Star Tribune have a sort of voice of God editorial, right? The unsigned editorial that comes from the editorial board, and that had a certain weight. And it is powerful, and we haven't run away from doing that when it's needed. But that had become kind of the daily product of that team. And quite frankly, people in today's media environment want to hear from individuals. They want to hear from voices. They want to hear who wrote the story and why they wrote the story. And they want to have that kind of connection to a person. So we've really revamped our opinion coverage to focus on individual voices, their personalities, their background, not just on staff, but in the community. This is our first take at a class of contributing columnists we've brought in. We want to hire a lot more. By the way, if anybody in this room wants to write for us or has an idea of someone who would like to write for us, please find me after or shoot me a note. We're always looking for more voices to feature, especially outside of the Twin Cities. When you just sort of sit there and let people submit things to you, you end up reflecting officialdom, if you will. And I think a more proactive approach, which we're trying to model here, goes out and finds the right writer or right leader for a particular topic at a particular moment and services that voice. And I think we just love your help on that front because I think it's a big part of our strategy to lean into voice and to personality. And then, of course, we have for over a century, for 300 decades or however long it's been, printed off the news on a piece of paper and dropped it on your doorstep, right? Which is the most normal thing in the world 20 years ago, and is just increasingly less normal. As I showed you earlier, the print market for us is the steadiest decline you will see on any of our analyses, and so we have to find new ways to get you the news. This, I will admit to you, is a work in progress. I have found has taken more work than I might have imagined, and I think just part of it is it's retooling the entire day and the structure and process of a news organization. I won't bore you with all the details, but it is an important thing, and it's going well. It's picking up steam. We're just in more platforms. We're on video. We're in audio too. We've done some new things with podcasting. I don't know if any of you saw the Ghost of a Chance podcast we launched a few months ago, but this is a really fascinating story told by Eric Roper there on the left, one of our top reporters, who wondered who lived in my house that I live in here in Minneapolis before I did. And he found out it was a couple named Harry and Clementine Robinson, who were a black couple in the 1920s, who were kind of part of an initial migrant class of blacks who came from the South to Minnesota, established a vibrant culture here, only to find zoning laws later kind of price them out of their own homes and their own neighborhoods, and really began a history of pretty divisive racial reckonings in the Twin Cities, right? And led to us having, as you all know well, some of the biggest income gaps between whites and people of color in the country. And so this story, very human-driven, of a guy trying to figure out what happened to his house and who lived there, has become a smash hit. It was the #2 history podcast in the country in February. We don't even really know what we're doing because we've never done this before. But Eric's just a good storyteller, and he's a good journalist, and he found a way to kind of get at that story in a way that was both personal but also universal. 6 episodes, it's a limited series, but came out again in February and has been really a big win for us. On May 2nd, I don't have a slide on this, but I can just share with you, we're launching our first ever kind of flagship podcast at the Strib. It's called Worth It, and it's essentially a weekly show in which we kind of lift up what's worth it, why it's worth it to live in Minnesota. What are the elements of living here that make it worth it through the lens of our journalism, but a bit more upbeat, kind of positive take on the state. It is not only going to be hosted by Nicole Norfleet, a night editor that lives in the Twin Cities, but also Aaron Brown, our newest columnist, who lives in the Iron Range. We're going to have kind of a greater Minnesota metro dynamic at play there. Again, we're figuring this out. We don't think podcasting is like our future, but we think audio has to be a big part of reaching people through their ears. I probably get as much news through my ears as through my eyes, if I'm totally honest with you. So we got to be there. We got to be there in ways that matter. And we got to partner with people in our market that can make us really successful. So audio's been a big one. I think I'm about to play you a video. So I'll just pause there to say, generally on mediums, like you all know, like if any of you here has kids, when's the last time they picked up a physical newspaper? Probably never, if not a long time. So we're really trying to rapidly shift towards digital. And just to give you a sense, about 2 months ago, we reached what we call the print eclipse, which means we now have more digital subscribers to the Strib than print, which is a big deal for us, both internally and institutionally, but also in terms of where we focus our efforts. So that's been the biggest change, I would say. So I thought I'd tell you about what's on the radar for us, and then I'd love to hear your questions, because this is very much a dynamic time for us. We're moving really quickly, and a lot's changing. I think one of the things that we've been helpful to see is the national media is paying attention to us. I'd like to say it's just because we're amazing, but I actually think in part it's because there are just very few local news organizations right now that are really taking a big swing. It's just kind of the nature of the industry. So we've been blessed to have some national folks paying attention. And I say this not because it just feels good, but because this helps us recruit top talent. It helps us build a sense of momentum in the market. It helps our people feel inspired to go forward. It's a hard time to be a journalist, right? So if you're a journalist and you see, folks are paying attention to what we're doing here, it helps. It gives us a little wind in our sails. And so we've had kind of an initial wave of good attention nationally to Minnesota, which has been helpful. And then, just recently we hired a brand new editor, which I'm thrilled at. Just yesterday, in fact, we announced Kathleen Hennessy is coming on board as our new editor. A big hire for me, for our team. It's the most important hire you'll ever make as a publisher, is who's going to actually lead your newsroom. One of the things I've learned in this job is even though you're CEO, if you're not the editor, you don't really control the newsroom in the same way, nor should you. And so that's a unique dynamic of news organizations that I think is great and unique and powerful. And so having a great editor matters. Kathleen's wonderful. You'll get to meet her. She'll be back in St. Cloud here, I think, in a few weeks as we do our listening tour. But born and raised in St. Paul. Grandfather was Mayor Thomas Byrne of St. Paul at one point. Left to Boston College and then Berkeley. Ended up at the Tribune newspapers, and then the Associated Press, and then the New York Times, where she most recently was one of their top political editors, but has been in Minnesota since 2021, moved back here during the pandemic. So kind of this unique mix of like literally running the playbook of the world's most successful media company at the New York Times, but doing it from Minnesota, and we're just thrilled to get her. I think she's going to be great, and she starts on May 12th. So that's another kind of major development. And then in terms of what's next, here, and I think most relevant to this audience, we're doing something new. You saw in those early slides the economic challenges that we face. Our balance sheet is shifting rapidly. Yes, we're moving quickly from print subscriptions to digital, but the math would inform that, in fact, in addition to those components, we have to find substantive news sources of revenue if we're going to remain the largest newsroom in the Midwest. And that's not just important because we as a business want to have impact, but when you think of the broader media ecosystem of Minnesota, to have a large sort of central player in the mix that can do the kind of deep investigative reporting that you come to expect from the Strib, but also tell the kind of statewide story, it's a numbers game. You just need that number of reporters to be there. And to fund them, you got to move into a space like philanthropy. I'm thrilled today that Shane Geider, Shane, maybe you could stand up and wave, is our new VP of philanthropy. His third day in the job. Let's give Shane a round of applause. Wonderful, wonderful leader. Many of you will get to know him, I hope. We're thrilled to have him. He just coming here from Chicago. Hasn't even moved his family here yet, but just started, again, day 3. But thought it was important to bring him along to get a sense for all of you. Just a visionary leader for us, in an effort that we kind of kicked off last fall to reimagine how can we think about engaging the donor class or foundations in supporting journalism. Important in that journey is defining Glenn's role in all this. Of course, you all know Glenn's history here as a person who was raised from nothing but became one of the most successful businesses in Minnesota history, saved the Strib through his investment, has never taken a penny from it and has only put money into it, and really believes that as he has in many ways committed an act of philanthropy by buying the Strib, now understands that for a longer term sustainable organization, we're going to need to engage a broader community of philanthropists and high net worth individuals and anybody, somebody who can give an extra $10 to make sure this model works out. So his commitment you can see here on the board of him only putting money into this and wanting to come alongside others. He put forward, when we kicked off our philanthropic effort, a $500,000 matching grant to begin to generate the kind of momentum in it. So he's somebody who's really put his money where his mouth is. But this is a new space for us, right? 15 years ago, you saw the publisher of the Strip up here saying, we're asking for your money. I mean, the Strip used to have a foundation where we gave out money. We were not only printing newspapers in the 90s, we were printing money. It was that good of a business. The monopoly was strong. It is not the same today. And we are not here doing this as a brainstorm. I'll keep it here for a second, because other papers have done it too. Did you know the New York Times accepts philanthropic donations? Did you know that the Associated Press does the same? The Seattle Times, a kind of local comparison, they have 27 journalists in their newsroom that are funded by local philanthropy and reporters. Mukhtar Ibrahim is here in the room, founded one of the most successful nonprofit news organizations in the Sahan Journal. You hear from him later. The model here is really clear. If journalism is a public good, if it is a civic good that we think is needed to make our societies better, we have to be putting it in a different place in our mind than we put a tech company or another platform that gets information to us. It requires real funding. So this is a new area for us. Our model, in addition to just getting off the ground and asking for money to save journalism and save our organization and help the state grow, is to get a little bit deeper on specific topics that we think our newsroom can add exponentially more value to if we can generate funding around them. The three we had the most momentum on so far is deepening our investigative journalism, bridging divides in our state, I'll talk about that more in a minute, and environment and climate reporting. The model here is simply you put a price tag on what you need to raise in order to hire a number of new reporters and have a community outreach effort that befits that work, and you raise it. And if you raise it, you can then do that, but you have to raise that money first. As we're talking to funders and donors, and this is the Bridging Divides effort, just to give you a sense, one of the arguments that we're making that I think has the benefit of just being really true is that for anybody trying to make progress in a sector of our society, right, needs to think about the media impact as an ingredient in that strategy, right? So if you're looking at trying to create clean water in our state, right, or trying to improve our environment, let's take that as an example. The stories we tell, the journalism we do is a piece of that broader ecosystem. It raises awareness for what's happening. Yes, as journalism, we have to be very clear that the funding doesn't influence the reporting, but just the topic that we're pursuing. But media is a big part of how people make decisions and how we elevate issues that matter. And so kind of building that argument for journalism as a part of a broader funding strategy to tackle an issue that donors are really excited about is a big part of what we're doing. I lift up Bridging Divides here because I think this is one that is unique to our moment. You've heard Steve's comments at the top, mine too, about just what feels like sometimes a polarized nature of our country. I think Minnesotans uniquely have long had a statewide identity that's quite stitched together. There's this sort of exceptionalism that we all know is a part of our history as a state that comes with its paradoxes too, but certainly leans to this idea that people in our state have more so than other places been able to bridge divides. And so how can journalism tell that story of the solutions that are working from one part of the state to the other, areas where we are connected, areas where we're different? How can journalism help us understand ourselves better, help us understand our communities better? That's kind of the idea of this reporting project. It's one of the ones that I think has a better chance, I think, of landing, we hope, with both Metro and Greater Minnesota Foundation. So we'd love your feedback on it. We're just now rolling this out. But we think if we get this right, you'll see journalism and storytelling and community engagement that has never been done before in this state around where we're going as a state, how we're connected, where we're not, where the solutions are. They can provide some bright spots, frankly, and some inspiration for community leaders like yourselves that are doing the Lord's work out there, but need that story told and need that connection point developed through journalism. So we're bullish on this. Would love your feedback on it. We're new. Shane's here. I'm here. We'd love to hear from you. But a big effort for us so far. The impact of journalism is clear. Like, we do big stories and it changes laws. There's just no other way to put it. And here's 3 examples. Denied Justice was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. It looked into police training on sexual assault that fundamentally changed the laws and structure on that in Minnesota. In Harm's Way did a similar level of investigation for protecting children in child care that needed greater protections at the county level. And then on accident victims here, we were finalists for a Pulitzer here as well, that restructured the activities of predatory lenders based on our journalism. So you know this because you've seen it, but it bears remembering that, like, when you do deep quality journalism, you're holding people's feet to the fire, you're holding the powerful to account, and things actually change in society. It's one of the tools that is as old as time, but is as relevant now as it ever was. So again, we think journalism is a big part of making our state better and want to position it kind of in that philanthropic place as we go forward. I think that's it. That was a lot. Thank you again for having me. I'd love to answer your questions, and thanks again for all that you do for our communities. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Leah Ryan. I am a board member of the Virginia Community Foundation. I am also the co-founder of IronRangeToday.com, which is a free local news source. And overall, for the last couple of years, I've been really mulling in my head, how can I collaborate those two areas of my life? And I'm wondering, has the Star Tribune tried anything with their local foundations? What lessons have you learned? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so feel free to go off on a tangent.
Oh, well, that's kind of you. No, it's a great question, Leah. I appreciate it. I think we've been in communication with all kinds of local foundations in the Twin Cities, but also outside the Twin Cities, which is why I'm so excited to be here today. We've got a number of partnerships going. Even to get a philanthropic effort going, we needed to partner with the Minneapolis Foundation to get the kind of fiscal status to be able to take tax-free donations. So that's one obvious example. But I think beyond that, where the conversations have been most interesting is around particular topics that foundations care about, where they think journalism could play a unique role. And I think there, funders are increasingly understanding the connection between quality, fact-based journalism and the causes that they're fighting for. And so as you think about your foundation role, but also your role in the range there, I think all kinds of opportunities to partner, I would hope. I think donors need to be shown the way a little bit on how this works, because it's new for us, certainly, at the Star Tribune in our state, but important. And Iron Range Today, might also be a fun partner with the Strip. We should talk about that. But, we are. You must know Aaron Brown, but a great journalist in our state who just come on board as a columnist for us. So a lot more stories about the range coming forward that he's bringing up and that we're excited to tell.
And if I can just ask a follow-up question. Having worked for a smaller newspaper that wasn't the Star Tribune, the Star Tribune is always kind of the big giant that was sort of trying to kick you guys in the ankles a little bit. And so can you talk you talked about subscription bundling, which is, I think, is a really interesting idea. But can you talk a little bit about this idea of sort of co-opetition between the Star Tribune and doing its work all over the state and all these other smaller news outlets on various platforms trying to do work as well?
Well, I think you can be purpose-driven and competitive at the same time. I would say that being purpose-driven is at the heart of anybody that works at our organization. It's certainly why I took the job. I don't think there's a person that works at the Strib or in any community organization, too, who doesn't just want good journalism to flourish. So I think we'll be better as a state ecosystem when more local papers survive. The subscription bundling is one thing. It's complex, just in the sense that it takes bandwidth, but we think it's a powerful step. The other thing we're doing is a content partnership agreement where we are more than happy to send, especially our State House coverage, because for a local paper outside of the Twin Cities, to send a reporter to St. Paul to cover what's happening in the Capitol is expensive and time consuming, and many just don't do it. We are partnering with many hyperlocal organizations to send them our Capitol coverage for free, and they can put it in their publications. We then ask them to send us their stuff for free, and we use it to buttress our kind of greater Minnesota coverage. So that's one. The third one, though, I'm probably the most excited about, which is how we're using AI. And we didn't really talk about this much in the speech, but it's fundamentally changing how people look at content, fundamentally changing our business model. Not just us, I'm sure all of you are navigating this in your own organizations. But there's a lot of opportunity here too. And so we've built an AI lab funded by a grant from OpenAI and Microsoft to bring some engineers and leaders together to develop a way forward that's more proactive. Yes, we're still going to go to Washington, work with Senator Klobuchar and others to make sure our content is protected. But we also need to be experimenting with these tools too. And we just got a grant from Google. We haven't really even announced this yet, so don't share it too widely. But to leverage some of these AI tools we have that take a look at your archives, like we have mountains of archives, most newspapers do, and pull out nuggets of new content from them and present it to readers in a more usable way that we are looking to federate and sort of syndicate cost-free to local news organizations across the state. So that grant is specifically for us to help other local news organizations to do this work. So we're trying. I mean, these are experiments. I don't know if they will work or not, but they seem like good bets. And I think that we as an organization won't survive in the way we need to if hyper-local news organizations aren't also there. So it's a win-win, quite frankly.
Great, thank you. I think we have another question over here.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for your remarks. I'm Katina Mortensen. I'm Minnesota Council. We are the home for Press Forward Minnesota, so definitely really interested in some of the great work that you're doing. My question is around, I know with the local news crisis, and you shared around thinking about business model changes and thinking about philanthropy. I'm curious if you all are also thinking about public policy and what sort of policies may be needed to help ensure sustainability for local news.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Katina. I think get back to the idea of journalism being a public good, a civic good. If you value it in a way, you should pay for it in that way. We at the legislature in Minnesota, but also I've seen more broadly in this country, some pretty unique new ways to drive taxpayer dollars into local news organizations in ways that don't influence the coverage itself. One of them is a tax credit for local businesses to advertise in a local paper versus in some other outlet. I think that's a good idea. I wouldn't say advertising is our most promising future, but not a bad idea. Another good idea we really like is a payroll tax structure, where payroll tax incentive structure, where any news organization gets a payroll tax deduction if they hire a journalist, right? So just trying to incentivize more hiring of journalists based on that kind of tax incentive. We've seen other things, just full-on grants. California has done this to many hyper news organizations just to experiment and try new things that come straight from state government. There's broader national efforts in public policy that Senator Klobuchar has authored with others that I'd say are kind of dead in the water, if I'm honest, but I think are interesting, called the Journalism Protection Act, which essentially requires tech companies to pay for the snippets of our content that you see on search results landing pages and things like that. I think that's harder at a national level, just given kind of the media environment more broadly. But all that to say, yes, I think that the public policy has to play a role in this. I just don't think the model survives more broadly if you don't have significant philanthropic investment and taxpayer dollars driving this work forward. Again, we're taking all the biggest swings you need to on audience, digital subscriptions. There's a whole host of other business initiatives we have going. But when you look at the full model of what it takes to have the number of journalists that can really cover a state and a community better, you're going to have philanthropy and public policy play a role.
So riffing on the public policy question, we seem to live in a country where there are sort of two sets of truths or three sets of truth or four sets of truth, kind of depending on what your perspective is. And I'm curious kind of what your thought is about the Strib sort of trying to reestablish itself as that honest broker, that without fear or favor talking to everyone, but that you're swimming up against some really strong social media currents and other sorts of currents.
We are, and we know that we've been called in some parts of the state the Red Star. We know the impression that liberal media is out there to push forward an agenda, and that if you're a mainstream media organization, you are therefore liberal. We take our reputation really seriously. Third-party sources that evaluate journalism put us right in the middle when it relates to our kind of political orientation. But our editorial pages are probably center-left, if I'm honest, and the state has leaned Democratic for a while, so you're contending with that. We take that all really seriously, and we don't just assume it will continue to be the case that we're an objective paper if we don't continually cultivate that in our newsroom. I'll give you an example. Like right now, we have this group called Trusting the News coming into our newsroom just to kind of reignite and retool and retrain our newsroom on how to just make sure that we are being as objective as possible in every way, and how do you kind of invest in that. Those same tools they learned in journalism school, but just kind of sharpening them at a time when things are so dynamic. Again, I don't think that suddenly people just wanted slanted news. I think everybody here wants to just know the truth. But who you trust to give it to you is a big question, and we want to be that place that you can trust. I don't think the place for an objective news organization has somehow gone away, that we're moving towards a world in which everyone has to take a side. But I do think it takes extra vigilance. And I think it takes, organizations like ours taking some swings in the opinion space too. We've tried to bring on more conservative columnists in our pages as well to kind of make sure that the opinion part feels more balanced, and I think that's had some good progress. But this is something you have to continually cultivate and maintain. It's not a steady state. And I would say when we look at some of the user profile data on who subscribes to the Strib, it was very much 50-50 until about 2015. And all that's happened since 2016, you could say it's Trump or not, but certainly the movement that Trump was a part of that sort of painted media in the way that it has really shifted that kind of political identification of our readership and every other readership of a large major regional paper in the country to be far more left than right. And that's a business problem for us. You know, we want subscribers from all political backgrounds. So our hope is that local occupies a space that's below the radar of Fox News and MSNBC and the sort of more political media outlets. But, you know, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, and it's one that I think is kind of fundamental to whether we're going to make it or not. So we take it really seriously.
Great. Thanks. Anybody with a question back here?
Yeah, my question actually kind of piggybacks on that. Dominic, you said a little earlier that the can't even read my writing here. That they were the custodians of the community, and I also would say that we're, as the newspapers and journalism, are also the custodians of the truths. You were just speaking to that, and I deliberately made that plural, the truths. Earlier, you talked about how accepting philanthropic donations would not influence reporting. And I'm just wondering, what kind of guardrails are you putting on yourselves to keep that? Because when you need money to stay afloat, that can be a difficult moral, ethical decision. So what kind of guardrails do you have on that money that may flow in?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the most important question, really, when it comes to whether this will work or not. Luckily, we're not the first cowboy at the rodeo. We've had a lot of other organizations in this country do it. We have a very carefully and thoughtfully crafted policy statement internally for how we roll with the philanthropic dollars that are donated. It's very clearly posted on our website and publicly. And we've learned from talking to the Seattle Times, the New York Times, the Post-Courier, the AP, and how they've done it. And the model is working. You know, Bill Gates, for example, funds a lot of healthcare reporting out of the Seattle Times. He never once gets to meet with the editor to say what they should be covering. He may have an opinion on it, but the strategy for him and his foundation isn't, how can I get stories that really promote the need for more mosquito nets in sub-Saharan Africa? But it's, I need more people to know what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, just what's happening, right? And journalism will do that. And so it really is a sort of categorical place of funding, not a sort of issue-specific space of funding that, sorry, I'm bumping into this, that is the model, and it's working really well. So we're just learning from our peers who've done it before. But we have to continue to earn that trust. I mean, look, you go back to the brand, and you go back to kind of all the efforts to lift up the strip and what it means in the state, that brands don't trust. It's the most important thing that a news organization has. I'd say it's probably true for most brands, but boy, you know, if a news organization doesn't get trust right, we're sunk. And so we couldn't take it more seriously, and our business can't survive unless we really don't protect and guard it. So it's a great question. It's the most important question. I think we have the right guardrails in place, but it takes, just like I said before, vigilance and maintenance and focus to make sure we get it right.
I think we've got time for one or two more questions. We've got one up front here.
Looks like this is a really curious side of the room. I'm Claire Richards. I'm a local business owner, and I serve on the Central Minnesota Community Foundation. In living in Greater St. Cloud for about 15 years now, I've noticed how impactful negative stories have had on our region in driving the perceptions both locally and outside of the community about this community. And obviously there's strategy to that. These negative stories tend to get better click-through rates and are beneficial, right? I'm curious now with this effort to reach to the outstate communities, what does that balance look like? How do you ensure that there is a balance of positive stories to the negative stories?
Yeah, this is a great question. In our last Minnesota Matters tour, we stopped in St. Cloud and talked to community leaders. This was really kind of the heart of the conversation. And you know, everyone in this room who knows St. Cloud read that story that Stead Herndon wrote about the New York Times, who wrote St. Cloud back when the CQ guys were on the rise, and sort of after the stabbing of them all. Many others, I think, saw what happened on Facebook when there was that claim that a police officer had shot a black man in town, which was total falsehood, just misinformation spread on Facebook. And I talked a lot about this with Mayor Kleiss before he left office, and kind of how St. Cloud has navigated that. And it's challenging. You know, I went to YouTube after that meeting with Mayor Kleiss and searched St. Cloud for news on YouTube. You know, you can imagine the top dozen videos were just murder, staff. Now, it's not unique to St. Cloud, by the way. This is sort of just how some of these algorithms work. But
They need that one.
Oh, sorry. But it's a problem, and I think we need to tell those stories. You need to know what's happening in your community, but you also need to tell the stories of hope and inspiration and what's going right. And not just because it feels good and it's kind of sunshiny, but because that is what reflects what's happening in a community. That's also the truth, right? And we as a news organization face a severe challenge with news fatigue right now. Like, how many people in this room have said, okay, to heck with it. I just can't read the news for a while. I need to take a break from reading the headlines. I'm just to heck with it. It's too much, right? Like, I'm raising my hand too. And so that's a business challenge for us. If all of our news is death and destruction, we lose subscribers and attention. So there's a lot of hope in this room. And maybe that's a good call to action for all of you is, if you have stories that aren't being told in the strip that you want to be told, please reach out to us. If there's stories of people doing things that are models that we can all learn from, please lift those up. This group is uniquely positioned to do that. You're in the community every day. You know nonprofits and other leaders that are doing great things. Like, we need those stories in our report. It's good for us. It's good for the community. It reflects more broadly what's happening here. I have a book coming out in a few months that talks about my journey of coming back to Minnesota. And there's a whole chapter that focuses on what I learned from Dave and the team here in St. Cloud around, the kind of aftermath of some of those moments in the kind of late 2000 teens and how St. Cloud has recovered on it. I just think media is a big part of helping this country remember who it is and where it's going. And I think for us as a news organization, it's not about, just writing sunshiny stories, but just better reflecting what's happening in a community. And there's just so much good things happening here. Part of the reason I met with Mayor Anderson earlier was just to get a sense, like, what do you see? What's happening here? Now, I don't control the newsroom every day. I'm the publisher, but we need to be in conversation on all these things. And so no matter where you're from, please do reach out if you don't feel like we're quite getting it in your community and there's a story we should be telling.
And I think that's a great call for action, and it's a great place to leave it. Please, thanks, Steve.
Thanks,
Grove.
Dominic. Thank you all. Thanks. It was fun.